Hello and welcome back to One Chord a Week. Today's video requires just a bit of setup and a bit of information on my part about how I'm going to manage the altered chords in this series. Okay, there are many altered chords and some of them are very similar. And so here's what I'm going to do. There will be a video coming up in the next few weeks with all the altered chords grouped together. And by altered chords, I mean the dominant altered chords with both a fifth and a ninth, okay? There's quite a few of them, and they can have both the fifth and the ninth altered. They can only have one of those notes altered. And if you're not familiar with this, don't worry about it. I'll explain everything in detail when the time comes. Okay, so that will be our altered video. But then you see today's video, the dominant flat 5 chord, and you say, well, this is a dominant chord with an altered fifth. And technically speaking, you're right. So today's video could be certainly considered a dominant altered chord. But because it's so similar and so close to the regular dominant chord, which is a fundamental chord, I thought that I would make a separate video for today's chord, which is the dominant flat 5 chord, and also its close relative, the dominant sharp 5 chord. So there will be a video on that coming up. Okay, so I just want to make sure that it's clear how this chord that we're doing today and the 7th sharp 5 are not included in the altered chord video, although the altered chords are actually based on these two chords, all right? So if you see the title of this video and you say, well, that's an altered chord, you are correct, but I am giving this chord today, the dominant flat 5, and eventually the dominant sharp 5, their own videos. I think it will be beneficial, and I think if you know about altered chords, it's no problem at all, and if you don't know about them, this will kind of introduce you in an easier way to the strange sound and functions of the altered chords, all right? So let's begin. The 7th flat 5 chord is a very sophisticated and interesting sounding chord. I personally like it a lot, and it's quite easy to use. It's often used as a substitute for dominant chords, as we'll see shortly. And you'll see it very often in jazz, and but it's really a very useful sound. So even if you're not into jazz, you can still use it. I like using it, and it's really that simple. You just pop it in anywhere you usually would have a regular dominant chord. You have to, of course, be careful of what you're doing on top of it, what you're doing with the arrangements, because you don't want to change a note here and there without thinking about the consequences of it. But really, it's a very beautiful sound and a beautiful color. So let me show you how we build the chord and what differences there are between this chord and other chords, that are actually very simple. Before we get to the formula of the 7th flat 5 chord, let me just say one thing. This is a chord that is often confused with another chord that's called dominant or 7th sharp 11. There's a difference between these two chords, and we'll have a video on the dominant sharp 11 pretty soon, but this chord we're doing today, the dominant flat 5 chord, is a dominant 7th chord where the fifth, which is usually a perfect fifth, has been lowered a half step, okay? So we don't have a perfect fifth, but we replace it with a flat 5. Whereas the dominant sharp 11 is a 7th chord, so root, 3rd, 5th, and minor 7th. And on top of that, we add the sharp 11th, which is the same as a flat 5, but it's added on top of it. So we're not replacing it. We still have the foundation of a regular dominant 7th chord. In today's video, as we'll see right now in the formula, we're actually losing the perfect fifth and we're replacing it with a flat 5. So different chords, different sounds. If you want to get into the sharp 11 sound, there's already a chord published here in this series called the major 7 sharp 11th. Of course, it's a different function, but it will get you introduced to the sound of the added sharp 11th. The formula of the 7th flat 5 chord is, of course, quite simple. We basically start with a regular dominant 7th chord and lower the fifth a half step, all right? So starting from the bottom, we would have C as the root. Then we would have our major 3rd, which is E. Then we'd have the strange note, the diminished fifth, which is pretty easy. We start from the regular perfect fifth and we lower it a half step. So from G, we go down to G flat. So we have root, major 3rd, the diminished fifth, G flat, and then we have the regular dominant 7th or minor 7th, B flat. And that's the formula. Now, be careful, because we did see the flat 5 many times before in the diminished chord and so on, but this is actually a major triad. So we have root, major 3rd, and the strange thing is that we lower the fifth. So don't get confused. Don't play the the minor third, because then it will just be the half diminished or minor 7 flat 5 chord, which we already saw, and you know, it's a great chord, but it certainly is totally different in function as to this one. All right, so root, major third, flat 5, and minor 7. I really like this sound. To me, it has the edge of a dominant chord, but it also has the mystery and the strangeness of a flat 5, and I really like it. And it's very simple to use. Usually this chord is used to replace or substitute any dominant chord. Okay, so basically the most common dominant chord will be on the 5th degree of the scale, so we would have G7 as the 5, resolved into 1, which is C. So if we take a very simple chord progression, it could be 2, which is D minor 7th, 5, which is G7th, and 1, which is C. Very simple. So instead of this G7th, we could use this chord, and we would have the same chords. We would have D minor 7th, G7th, but this time with the flat 5. Sounds strange until you resolve it back to C. Okay, so as you noticed, I created this little chromatic thing by using this chord, because we have the D minor 7th with this D down here. When I go to the G7 flat 5, I have this D flat, and when I go to C, I have a C. So I'm creating this beautiful descending chromatic run on the, in this case, in the high voice. Another way to do this, to achieve the same chromatic run but in a different way, is to use this chord to replace the tritone substitution, which means it's a strange name, but it's very simple. Whenever you have a dominant chord, you can replace it with the same kind of chord, the same 7th chord, but with the root 1 tritone above. So in this case from G, instead of playing G7, I could actually play D flat 7. And it would be the same kind of progression. Right? The same kind of resolution, but it's a bit of a different sound. So we replace the G7 for the G7 flat 5. We can certainly replace the D flat 7 for the D flat 7 flat 5. And it will give us again this chromatic thing, because we have D minor 7th, D flat 7 flat 5, and then C major. And now we have the run in the lower register. Okay, so that's probably the two most common uses for this chord, but eventually, you know, you can use it every time you have a regular dominant 7th chord. You can pop this in instead of it. Now be careful, of course, because you replace a regular diatonic note for one that is outside the scale. After all, it is an altered chord, and so your melody and your arrangement and your bass, and if you have chords underneath, you know, they all have to agree with this. And another thing that's curious about this chord is that it has only 2 possible inversions. So check this out. If I play this version of the chord and I move it up a tritone, it's the same chord. All right? And it's pretty interesting, but if you check it out, you have C, G flat, B flat, and E. And if I move it up here, I have G flat, C, E, and B flat. It's the same chord. So there are really only truly 2 inversions possible, the one that starts on the root and the one that starts on the 3rd. As soon as I move to the diminished 5th, I'm in the same chord as before. And the other thing that's curious about it is that it has 2 tritones. We have 1 tritone from the C to the G flat, which is our diminished 5th. And then we have another tritone that is between the E and the B flat, or between the B flat and the E, it doesn't matter. So it's made up of 2 tritones. It has 2 tritones that they're kind of trying to resolve. So it's a very interesting chord in sound and also in its construction. Because of the peculiarities of its constructions, there are not actually many fingerings for this chord, and some of them can be complicated. I'm going to give you 3 of them that you can use right now. They're pretty easy to play. And the first one has the root on the 1st fret of the 2nd string. So we're in this area of the neck, but be mindful that the root is not up here, but it's down here, all right? And it's like this. We have On the second fret of the sixth string, we have the G flat, which is our diminished fifth. We skip a note, a string, sorry, and then we play the E on the second fret of the fourth string, that's our third. We play our minor seventh on the third fret of the fifth string, that's B flat, and the root finally on the first fret of the second string. Okay, so that's our first position. Next, I'm going to go to the third fret of the fifth string because it's a useful place, of course. And we'd have this. We have the root now on the third fret of the fifth string. Then we have the diminished fifth, which is on the fourth fret of the fourth string. That's G flat. Then we can play B flat on the third fret of the third string. And then stretch your little finger a little bit outwards to the fifth fret of the second string, that's E, and this is again the same chord, okay? Now, the final position I'm going to give you in on the 8th fret of the 6th string, and you will notice that it's the same exact thing as down here. And we already talked about why, you know, but I think it's useful to have one with the root at the bottom. So I'm going to give it to you on the 6th string as well. So I'm going to give you this position, which is kind of the same as this. Makes it easier this week to memorize all of them. And so it's the same thing. It's 8, skip the 5th string, and then 8, 9, and 7. So the order of the notes change, of course, but it is the same notes, and it's the same chord. So basically, whenever you learn one of these chords, or even if you look for your own fingerings, then you can play the same thing, one tritone above, and you'll get the same exact chord. Right? So it's pretty simple actually to play, and it's pretty simple to find. Another way to look at it is you can take any dominant seventh positions that you know, you find the fifth and you lower it, and that's it, right? Or you could take a half diminished chord and raise the third. And since we looked at already a lot of these chords, and there's links up here if you need them, then you have a bunch of fingerings for this chord that you already know, but you just don't know about it. Okay, so you can go and modify these two chords, for example, and find a bunch of them. All right, so good luck. When it comes to scales, we're walking into rarefied air because this chord is really quite specific. But you'll be surprised actually at how many scales actually fit this chord. But you know, these videos are really about chords, and I'm always wary of going into too much depth with scales because it really does fall beyond the scope of these videos. But I will give you two scales to look at. And the first one is the whole tone scale, which we already saw in the augmented chord, and it's a very simple scale. It's made up of a bunch of whole steps. It's all whole steps, and it's usually associated with the augmented sound, but funnily enough it works with this chord that has a diminished fifth. And the reason is that if you look at the structure, we find the major third, the augmented fourth or diminished fifth is the same note, and the flat seven. So all the notes of the chord fall into these whole tone scales, and so you can try it out, play the chord, and then improvise a little bit with these series of whole steps. And you see that it works perfectly. And I really like the sound of the whole tone scale. And another strange scale that works over this chord is called the Lydian minor. Now, I won't go into the details of the Lydian minor because it's really beyond what we're doing here. But first of all, it's called the Lydian minor, and it's a major scale. And the second of all, it's the fourth mode of another strange scale, which is called the Neapolitan major scale, that has a very close relative that's called the Neapolitan minor. All with its, you know, they all have their own modes. And so for now, just think of it this way. It's a whole tone scale that, like we just saw, but it adds the perfect fifth. So we have this little chromatic. It adds this little chromatic sound. And it becomes interesting because this fifth, it gives you this strange chromatic sound against the diminished fifth of the chord. So I suggest you make a little loop of this or any other position that I taught you, and try playing the whole tone. And the whole tone, you'll see how it really fits the chord like a glove. It has no added edge to it. You know, the chord is kind of edgy, but once you start improvising with the scale, you just maintain that edginess of the chord, you don't add to it. But when you add this this little natural 5 there with the chromatic run, it becomes very interesting. Very well, you've made it to the end of this intense video. I hope it wasn't too much. You know, I'm always walking a fine line with these videos because I want to give you enough information, but I can't teach you everything there is to know about a single chord in one sitting. It just simply wouldn't be beneficial. It's too much information, and it will certainly be too much for a shorter video, and it can be absorbed in one sitting. Okay, so that's the first thing. On the other hand, I don't want to keep things too simple because that would be a disservice to your quest of becoming a better musician and guitarist. So I'm always trying to walk that middle ground, and I'm sure often I fail, but hopefully sometimes I succeed in it and you get something useful and practical out of these videos. All right, so I hope you can maybe subscribe if you haven't done so. If you enjoyed the video, please do like, comment, you know, all the very simple stuff that really helps me out a lot, and eventually will help you out if I keep making videos, hopefully, and you learn new things. And what else? Make sure you download the free PDF. There's no strings attached, no email, no nothing, registration. You just simply click on it and you get it. It's 21 licks. It's pretty cool, and you can study technique and composition and improvisation all at the same time for free, which is kind of cool. If you need private tutoring and lessons and coaching, there's links down there. If you want to support the channel, there's links down there. There's all kinds of stuff down there. You should check it out, and you can listen to my music, stream it, buy it, or ignore it, whatever you want. All right, I will see you very soon with a new chord, and we'll see what I'll do, if another one of these very intense ones, or maybe I'll let you rest for a week or two and then hit you hard with the difficult ones. I hope you have a great time ahead of you with the guitar. Play a lot of music, write a lot of music, and put it out there for us to enjoy. All right, see you soon. Bye-bye.